What's up guys, my name is Jack, you're watching JBTCG, and today we're talking about an equation that I made using Sword and Shield box prices to predict Scarlet and Violet booster box prices 2 years after their releases. It took me a while to compile all this data and actually make this equation, so if you enjoy this type of content, subscribe and let me know if you want to see more of it because I'm happy to do so. Alright, in my Excel sheet, I have every single Sword and Shield set, and then I took the average of their top 5 single cards, so in a near mint condition, 6 months post-release. So that means I added up their top 5 most expensive cards and then divided them by 5, pretty simple. And the whole reasoning behind this is that the singles and PSA card values are what determine the booster box value. Now this isn't a perfect one-to-one correlation. Sometimes sets are printed shortly, and sometimes people really like a booster box for whatever reason, and they kind of stray a little bit. But the general idea is more expensive cards means more people want to open those packs, means higher demand, and more expensive booster boxes because of that. So with that, I also took the average of the top 5 PSA 10 graded cards 6 months post-release. However, I did make a distinction with the earlier sets, so Rebel Clash through Battle Styles, that when you got your cards back from PSA a year after release for, say, Rebel Clash, that is more reminiscent of what it was like to get Astral Radiance cards 6 months after release, just because PSA was so backed up back in 2021 and 2020. So I just made that little distinction. And if you look at like most of the price charting graphs and stuff around that time, you'll see that the like peaks and when like PSA cards kind of came in and crashed was around the 1 year time, and then 9 months for Battle Styles. And then we're kind of back to the 6 months normalization around Chilling Reign onwards. So I just want to make that distinction. And also you notice Sword and Shield base is empty here. And this is because I couldn't find the data I was looking for Sword and Shield base. It just didn't have it. So that's omitted, which is a little unfortunate, but we're gonna have to roll with it. It's not perfect. But anyways, I took the sum of the average top 5 single near mint cards, and then the average of the top 5 PSA cards. So I added those together to get my sum values in this column. And you'll see that they vary wildly, with Evolving Skies being the highest, obviously. And then with that, I made that my X value. And then I took the 2-year box price and made that the Y value. So in this kind of regression, the box price, the 2-year box price, is going to be our dependent variable. And the sum of these card values is going to be our independent variable. And I know a lot of you guys are going to have questions to ask in the comments about why I did it this way, and why didn't I factor in like other random things like pull rates and how much it was printed. And I can't cover everything in this one video because it would be like 30 minutes long. If you guys want me to, I can, but for this one I won't. But I will cover those 2 topics. So pull rates, I can't factor in pull rates to this because I'm already factoring in the price of the cards. If pull rates are lower, the cards are going to be more expensive. We already know this. This is kind of like a proven fact at this point. A card with the exact same art, but it's way more rare, is going to be worth way more money. That's just how it works. And I can't factor in how much they're printing because I have no idea how much of this set they print. Like Vivid Voltage, they reprinted it a ton, but did they print more Vivid Voltage than some of the later Sword and Shield sets with the alt arts? I don't know. There's no real way to know that. So I can't factor that in, unfortunately. I would love to have all that data, but that isn't something I'm privy to. So moving on to our graph here. You'll see that we have all of our data points, and then we have our curved regression line here, or exponential regression. And you'll see the R2 value, which is kind of a determinant of how correlated our variables are, is 0.737. And if you don't know, this value can go from 1 to -1. 0 basically means there's no correlation, -1 means there's a strong negative correlation, and 1 means there's a strong positive correlation. So at 0.737, we do have a decently strong positive correlation. And you'll see there's a decent spread between all the data points, and that's just because there's different variables. There's no possible way to get this graph to have an R value of 1. It just won't happen. There's way too many variables that go into this stuff, and it's not possible. But this information gives us everything we need to predict the Scarlet and Violet boxes. And I'll have you guys guess, what do you think this data point is up here way at the top? I'm not even gonna let you like think about it. It's Evolving Skies. You already knew it, I already knew it. But let me ask you a much more difficult question. What is this data point way above 400 over here on the single card calculation, but with a box price that's super, super low? Well, it's actually Chilling Reign. Believe it or not, Chilling Reign was $131 per booster box with a single card calculation of 420. Nice. But that just shows how much depth is in this set and how undervalued it was at this point. Because when was that 2-year price tag? That was a year ago in a couple months, June 18th, 2023. This was $130 a booster box, and now it's well over 200. I still think Chilling Reign is undervalued because of how much depth it has. And I mean, honestly, most of the alt art sets I still think are undervalued, and I think they'll go up a good amount over the next couple years, but I was surprised to see this data point. Anyways, enough yapping about Sword and Shield. I know you guys came here for Scarlet and Violet, so we'll get into it. And I'll go in chronological order. So Scarlet and Violet base to Twilight Masquerade. I also calculated for Stellar Crown and Surging Sparks, but those aren't viable by our parameters here, so they don't really count. But I figured I'd calculate them out just for the fun of it. But for Scarlet and Violet base, we have an average for the single cards at $16.40, that's pretty low. That's dirt cheap. And then for the top 5 PSA cards, which is pretty much the same exact cards, it's $85 is the average, which is also very low. That gives us a sum of 101. And then our booster box prediction using our equation gives us a value of $105 on March 31st of 2025, which I think is pretty realistic. That's what, 4 months from now? To think that Scarlet and Violet base will be $105 in 4 months, I find extremely realistic. I don't see this set moving up to 120, 130 in that time, maybe by the end of 2025, but 105 sounds pretty accurate. And when I see predictions and values like that, it makes me think that this is correct, and I didn't mess up the equation in some way, because that's a very realistic guess. So next up is going to be Paldea Evolved. Yes, Paldea Evolved. So this, with the average of the top 5 single cards, is only $36 at this point. And that's because the Magikarp hadn't shot up to $110 at this point. It was actually valued at $54 6 months post-release, which is crazy because it's super, super expensive. And I don't see it ever dipping back below even $80 at this point. And then the average for the top 10 PSA 10 cards is much higher. We're at $197 at this point. With the Magikarp being $333 in a PSA 10. Now it's about 500 or around 500, so it has still grown from there. That gives us a sum value of 234, and then when we calculate that out, our predicted booster box price for Paldea Evolved is $144.25 in June of 2025. This I also find fairly realistic. I don't think Paldea Evolved is going to be at like 170 by this point. I think most people will be focused on the newer sets that are hyped up, like Prismatic Evolution, Team Rocket, Black and White, and then the Gym Hero set. So I think this one will kind of stagnate for a little bit. Maybe it pops up, I could be completely wrong, but this is a fairly realistic guess because right now it's right around 130-ish. I'm not 100% sure on that. Between 130 and 140, and I think in 7 months, it could be at 145. Now next up, we got Obsidian Flames. For the average singles, we got $20, and then the average PSA 10 cards, we have 106. This one's pretty low, a little bit higher than Scarlet and Violet base, but also very low. And then for our booster box predicted price, this is going to be $111.61, and this is going to be in August 11th of 2025. I think Obsidian Flames has actually already surpassed this amount, which is kind of crazy. Like, Obsidian Flames has been shooting up behind the scenes. No one has been talking about it except for Robert. You know who you are. You've been championing Obsidian Flames from the get-go, and it's making its move. I think honestly it could be at like 130 by this point, because I think it's at 120 right now. But that remains to be seen. So this one, I would say, underestimated what Obsidian Flames can be, but it's not perfect. Next up, we got Paradox Rift, the set that PokeNE dumped $25,000 into, and Rudy from Alpha Investments has been buying a bunch of, because that's the only thing that's in stock with distributors right now. So the average of the top 5 singles is $35, which is pretty cheap. And at this point, 6 months post-release, the Groudon was only $24. I wanted to make that note. The Magikarp and Groudon were like half of their value right now when their sets were 6 months old. Now we get, for the PSA 10 cards, we got $115, pretty similar to Obsidian Flames, just a little higher. And then when we calculated it out, our predicted box price for Paradox Rift on November of 2025 is going to be $118, which is, that's pretty high considering you can get Paradox Rift for like $99, $95 right now. And if you get it on like TikTok Shop, you can get it in the 80s. $118 market price would be pretty high. And I think that's really realistic. I think Paradox Rift will make some moves. I don't think they're going to reprint this set at this point because there's so many other bigger sets that people care about. And if this is the only thing that's left at distributors or left in stock, the Pokemon Company knows it's not selling like the other sets. So I do think Paradox Rift has some room to grow, and 118, that'd be a great price. Next up, we got Temporal Forces, a set that I really love and I've been saying is undervalued. And I guess we'll see right now. Is it really undervalued? With the average of the top 5 singles being $52.60 and the average of the top 10 PSA 10 cards being $109, we get a predicted box price of $121.48. This is barely beating out Paradox Rift, which I thought it would beat it out by more. And I think the reasoning for that is the raw cards are pretty expensive, but the PSA 10 copies aren't. You see there's barely a double in price from raw card to PSA 10 versus Paradox Rift, where you basically triple in value. So I don't know what they were doing in the card printing facilities, but apparently they got it right with Temporal Forces and none of the other sets. So $121, and this would be predicted for March of 2026. So that is in a while. That is over a year from now to make it to $121. And I think it could do that in a year. I think it could be at 120 by the end of 2025. And I think by March it could be closer to 130. But $121 is a very realistic guess. And unfortunately, I was hoping it would be estimated at much higher than it is. But I'll take my slice of humble pie. Temporal Forces, good, not great. Next we got Twilight Masquerade. And I know all of you guys have been waiting for this one. The big dog from Scarlet and Violet, with an average top 5 single cards of $106.80, which is basically the average of the other sets PSA 10 cards, and an average of the top 5 PSA 10 cards at $246, we get a predicted box price of $191.48 in April of 2026. And this I find to be a great guess. And the reasoning for this is because I don't think Twilight Masquerade will make very many moves through the next year, even the next year and a half. And this is because 1, I think they will reprint it, and 2, hype is going to go into all these newer sets. And as we know, MSRP for a Pokemon booster box in the US is $163. So I think the Pokemon Company will reprint this set. It will become available on the Pokemon Center, and I think it'll be there for a while all the hype is in the newer sets. So I don't think it will make much gains, but I think eventually it will sell out and it will creep up to this $190 value. This, I think, is a very, very realistic guess. I don't think Twilight Masquerade will be a $250, $300 box in this time. I don't think any sets are going to be allowed to be at $300, $400 a box. I think if sets get that expensive, the Pokemon Company will just reprint them. That's probably what they're going to do for Surging Sparks, which will probably be up near $250, maybe even near $300 by the time they reprint it. But they're absolutely going to reprint it because they need to get these cards into the hands of players. They need to make it more accessible so it's not getting scalped everywhere and people don't get upset. The Pokemon Company is an expert at managing this, and if they have a set that's doing super well, they're gonna reprint it because guess what? They can make more money off of it. It's easy. All right, I'll stop yapping and I'll give you guys Stellar Crown and Surging Sparks. So Stellar Crown, so the reason I can't say these are like viable predictions is because it hasn't been 6 months post-release, so these cards haven't settled. And for Surging Sparks, it's been 2 weeks, so not even close to settling. I just did it for fun. Stellar Crown, $48.60 for the single cards and $178 for the PSA 10s. And then with our predicted box price in September of 2026, we have $141.67, which I think is an overestimation. I think it'll be probably closer to like $130, but I do think it's a solid set. Terapagos is pretty expensive. The Bulbasaur, the Squirtle are both expensive. I think they're both at like $40 and $50 for the raw cards. So it's a solid set. It has some depth, but by no means is it like a top tier. It's not Twilight Masquerade. It's not Surging Sparks. So I think it's more in the Temporal Forces realm of sets than Twilight Masquerade and Surging Sparks. But speaking of Surging Sparks, with an average single card price of $185 and an average of the top 5 PSA 10 cards at $912, our predicted booster box price is $1,126. And this is way off. This will not even be close to this. It's just skewed because the PSA 10 copies are just getting back in from PSA. So they have these massive premiums, like the Pikachu is $2,000. Latios was $1,000. I don't even know what the other ones were at. Maybe Milotic, Hydreigon, Licia. They're all above $500. Insane pricing. This is gonna fall down. I think by the time this settles out, it'll be predicted right around 200, 250. And I think that would probably be a good prediction, but I'll come back in 6 months and I'll make an update for this, and I'll let you guys know what it says. If you guys like this style of video and want to see more equations or an update on my equation that I made 6 months ago to predict Sword and Shield booster box prices, I'm happy to do so. Just let me know down in the comments, and also let me know if you want this equation or want this sheet. I'll probably send it out to you guys if you guys want it, but that's all I got for today. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and stay safe out there.